Young stable boy discovered the truth about his real father and fought the heir to defend his mother's name. The manor woke before the sun, but the first life that moved with purpose was never in the grand hall or the lord's chambers. It was in the stables. Hooves shifted restlessly in their stalls, chains rattled softly, and the scent of hay and damp wood rose with the mist. Lantern light swung in gentle arcs, throwing warm circles over straw and dust. In the middle of it all, a young boy moved as if he belonged more to this place than to the world outside it. His skin was a deep, warm brown, kissed by years of sun and wind. His hair, thick and curly, refused to lie flat no matter how many times someone tried to tame it. This morning it formed a wild halo around his face as he dragged a bale of hay across the floor, the muscles in his thin arms straining with the effort. He grunted, laughed quietly at himself, and nudged it the rest of the way with his foot. "Stubborn," he muttered. The mare in the nearest stall snorted, as if offended. "I didn't mean you," he added quickly, a smile tugging at his lips. He pressed his forehead briefly to the horse's neck, inhaling the familiar mix of sweat and straw. The animals never looked at him the way people did. They didn't stare at his skin too long, or at his curls, or at the way he didn't quite fit into any of the boxes the manor liked to keep people in. Horses only cared that his hands were gentle, and his voice was soft. "Elias," a voice called from the doorway, low and warm. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. His shoulders relaxed before his mind even registered the sound. His mother stood just inside the stable door, framed by the cool blue of early dawn. Her uniform dress was already on, apron tied tight around her waist, sleeves rolled up as if the day had been going on for hours instead of just beginning. Her skin was a rich, deep brown, smooth despite the years etched into her bones. In the half-light, she seemed carved from shadow and strength, solid and unshakable. "You're up early," she said, stepping in and letting the door swing shut behind her. "You leave before the sun," he answered, shrugging. "I like to say goodbye to you before the manor steals you." She smiled, that small, tired smile that always made his chest ache. "The manor doesn't steal me. It just rents me for too many hours." "That sounds worse," he replied. She walked toward him, her boots whispering over the straw, and reached out to brush a curl away from his forehead. It bounced back defiantly. She clicked her tongue in mock annoyance. "This hair," she murmured. "It refuses to behave." "Maybe it knows it doesn't have to," he said. "Maybe you taught it that," she replied. But there was pride in her eyes, not scolding. Up close, he could see the small cracks in the skin of her hands, the faint scars along her knuckles from too many years of hot pans, rough stone, and work no one bothered to thank her for. He watched those hands more often than he watched anything else in the manor. They had carried him when he was smaller, shielded him when whispers grew too loud, and held him together when the world felt like it was trying to pull him apart. "You slept?" she asked. He hesitated. "Enough." "Enough," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "That sounds like a lie." He tried to smile it away. "The floor isn't so hard anymore. I've gotten used to it." "You're not supposed to get used to it," she said softly. "You're supposed to outgrow it." He didn't have an answer for that, so he turned back to adjusting a saddle strap that didn't really need adjusting. She watched him, her gaze moving over his shoulders, his posture, the tension in his jaw. She saw everything. She always did. "Any trouble yesterday?" she asked. "Nothing worse than usual," he said. "A guard said I was in his way when I was 3 steps away from him." "What did you do?" "I moved," he admitted, feeling his cheeks warm. "That's not cowardice," she said. "That's choosing your battles. It feels like letting them win." She sighed, and the sound seemed older than the building they stood in. "They decided they'd won long before you were born. Staying on your feet is its own kind of victory." He wanted that to feel comforting. It didn't. From somewhere beyond the stable walls, a bell rang, faint but insistent. The manor's way of announcing that the noble world was waking up. Soon there would be orders, demands, footsteps too loud and laughter too sharp. Soon she would vanish into corridors he wasn't welcome in. "I have to go," she said, I know. She straightened his collar, smoothing the fabric over his chest with careful fingers, as if appearances in the stable mattered as much as they did in the hall. Maybe to her they did. Maybe making him neat was one of the few ways she could push back against what people said about him. If anyone speaks to you with disrespect, she said quietly, you walk away. You hear me? They always speak to me with disrespect, he replied. Her eyes hardened for a second, a flicker of fire under the surface. Then you keep walking. Your anger is worth more than they are. I can handle it, he said. I'm not a child. You are my child, she corrected gently. That's not something you outgrow. He looked up at her, at the strong lines of her face, at the way she seemed to hold herself together even when the world around her tried to unmake her. The nobles walked past her as if she were furniture. The other servants spoke to her only when necessary, their voices clipped, polite, distant. No one in the manor ever said out loud why. They didn't have to. Their eyes did it for them. I wish you didn't have to go in there, he said, tilting his head toward the manor. I wish you didn't have to stay out here, she answered. He opened his mouth to speak, but a shout cut through the yard. Where is she? The Lord's breakfast isn't going to serve itself. His mother tensed, then schooled her features into neutrality. She gave his cheek one last quick stroke. Eat something, she said. Don't spend the whole morning feeding everyone but yourself. I will. And stay away from the main hall today. Why? Her gaze flicked briefly toward the upper windows of the manor, where curtains fluttered behind glass like watchful eyes. The heir came back last night, she said, and he always brings trouble with him. Elias swallowed, a familiar knot forming in his stomach. I'll stay here. Good. She leaned in and pressed her forehead to his just for a breath. Remember, no matter what they say, no matter how they look at you, you are not less. You are mine. That is enough. He nodded, because that was what she needed him to do. She pulled away, turned, and walked toward the manor with her back straight, her head held high, as if dignity were armor. He watched her until the servant's door swallowed her, and the echo of her footsteps disappeared into corridors he only knew through imagination. The stable felt bigger without her in it, and colder. He went back to work, moving through the stalls with practiced ease, but the world outside the stable walls tugged at his attention. Voices drifted in and out from the yard, the clatter of dishes, a barked order, a burst of laughter that sounded more cruel than amused. Every sound made his shoulders tighten a little more. As he forked hay into the last stall, he heard it, a different kind of murmur. Not the routine noise of a busy morning, but a low buzz of curiosity. He paused, pitchfork in hand, and stepped to the stable doorway. Servants were gathered near the side entrance of the manor, not close enough to be accused of eavesdropping, but not far enough to be innocent of it either. Their heads were tilted, their mouths tight. 2 guards stood at attention, their spears crossed, blocking the view inside. What's happening? Elias asked a kitchen boy who hovered near the stables. The boy jumped, eyes widening when he saw who had spoken. His gaze darted over Elias's brown skin, his curls, his stable clothes. Unease flickered in his face, the kind that said he wanted to answer and wanted to disappear at the same time. Nothing, he said too quickly. Just voices. The heir's in a mood. He's always in a mood, Elias muttered. The kitchen boy glanced nervously toward the servant's door. Just stay here, all right? Today's not a good day to be seen. Since when is it ever a good day? Elias asked, but the boy had already hurried away. Elias stood there, one hand gripping the edge of the doorframe, the other still wrapped around the pitchfork handle. His pulse drumbeat in his ears, loud and insistent. He looked up at the manor. Somewhere inside those walls, his mother was moving through rooms that treated her like a machine instead of a person. Somewhere inside, the heir was watching everyone with those pale, judging eyes. Somewhere inside, decisions were being made in rooms where his name was probably never meant to be spoken. He didn't know it yet, not fully, not in a way he could put into words. But the whispers that had followed him his whole life were about to grow louder. And before the sun set on that day, he was going to hear something he could never unhear. Elias never needed anyone to explain to him that he was different. The world had been doing that job since he was too small to understand words, yet old enough to feel the weight of eyes lingering on him longer than they should. In the stables he felt peace, but the moment he took even 2 steps toward the manor house, the air changed, as if the very atmosphere had been trained to reject him. His earliest memories were made of whispers, not words spoken to him, but about him, always when they assumed he wasn't listening. Soft murmurs behind half-closed doors, brief conversations that died the moment he stepped into a room, quiet sighs accompanied by glances that slid over his brown skin, as though trying to decipher something unsettling written on it. That hair, he heard once, back when he was too young to reach the top shelf in the pantry. He looks nothing like anyone here. He's the image of her. But the father, who could it be? These questions followed him like shadows. They grew as he grew. When he was 6, they confused him. At 10, they stung. By 12, they sliced through him like slow, deliberate cuts. What was so wrong about having the skin he had? What was so disturbing about the curls that framed his face and refused to obey any comb, as if even his hair rebelled against the world's expectations? That was the part that bothered him most. It wasn't simply who he was, but what his existence reminded others of. And more deeply, what it reminded him of. The heir, the young noble just a few years older than Elias, had always looked at him as though his presence was a personal insult. When they were children, Elias thought it was just the usual arrogance of the wealthy, boys born into privilege believing everyone else should crawl. But as he got older, he noticed something different in the heir's eyes, something more bitter than superiority, something sharper than disdain, something like fear, the fear of a suspicion. One day, while Elias scrubbed buckets behind the kitchen, he overheard 2 maids speaking in hushed voices. "Have you ever noticed? He has the Lord's eyes." "Don't say that. Do you want to get us both in trouble?" "But he does, doesn't he? He does enough to be dangerous." Elias froze, water spilling from the bucket without him noticing. The Lord's eyes? He pressed a hand to his face, as if he might feel the truth written there. But mirrors had never answered him. He saw only himself, brown-skinned, wiry, sun-marked, a kind of beauty no one called beauty. But his eyes, he had never wondered about them until that moment. That night, he quietly asked his mother if he looked like anyone. She stopped cutting vegetables mid-motion. Her hand hung in the air, knife glinting in the candlelight, as if the room had suddenly become too heavy to move through. "You look like you," she said softly. "And that is enough." But he felt the truth tremble behind her words. The truth was that even she, strong, grounded, unbreakable, became tense whenever these questions surfaced, as if the past lay buried just beneath her skin, ready to burst through if touched. She would smile, change the subject, talk about the next day's work. But she never truly answered. Elias didn't push her, but something grew inside him nonetheless. It wasn't just a boy's desire to know who fathered him. It was something bigger, deeper, impossible to ignore. Why didn't anyone want him to know? Why was everyone afraid of the answer? Why did his very existence seem to bother them? He saw it in the smallest details. When he entered the pantry, conversations ended abruptly. When he crossed the courtyard, guards stared too long. When nobles walked past, their mouths pinched as if swallowing distaste. Even village children, who should have known nothing, treated him with the kind of cautious distance they learned from their parents. But what hurt most wasn't the whispers. It was how people acted like he wasn't really there when they spoke. As if he didn't matter enough to be spared the cruelty. As if he were invisible. Except he wasn't invisible. Not truly. He was seen. Too much. Watched, analyzed, measured against secrets he didn't know existed. The older servants tried to hide their discomfort, but manor children repeated everything they heard with the unfiltered honesty of youth. He has no father. He's nobody's son. He shouldn't even be here. He's a mistake. The first time someone called him a mistake, Elias was 9, and the heir, always nearby, always listening, laughed. That night, Elias cried alone in the hayloft, arms wrapped around his knees, straw sticking to his cheeks. His mother found him long after midnight, her hands trembling as she gathered him onto her lap the way she used to when he was little. "No one decides your worth," she whispered into his curls. "No one." But he had seen the fear in her eyes, the same fear that lingered every time she glanced toward the manor's grand windows, the same fear she carried whenever the heir passed too close. And a question began forming in his chest, quiet at first, then louder, heavier, impossible to silence. Why does everyone act like I wasn't meant to exist? He didn't know the answer, but other people knew it. The house knew it, and the whisper that had followed him since childhood, about his skin, his hair, his face, was about to swell into something far more dangerous, a truth impossible to hide. Elias had grown up surrounded by questions. Now he was about to learn that some answers hurt more than ignorance ever did. The air had always been a storm brewing over the manor, beautiful to look at from a distance, but dangerous the moment you stepped too close. Elias learned this early, long before he understood the reason behind the young lord's sharpened gaze. Even as children, when the heir passed through the courtyard surrounded by attendants, Elias felt the shift in the air around him. Servants stiffened, guards straightened. His mother lowered her eyes, not out of respect, but out of self-preservation. The heir never needed a reason to be cruel. He created them. It usually began with small things. A tray accidentally knocked from Elias's mother's hands, forcing her to kneel and pick up shards while nobles tittered behind their gloves. Extra chores dumped on her near the end of the night, being sent to clean rooms she had already cleaned, only because someone wanted to remind her she had no power to protest. The heir didn't shout or throw tantrums. His cruelty was quieter, colder, something calculated. He inflicted humiliation the way others breathed, effortlessly, without guilt, and the mother bore it all silently. Elias saw this silence more clearly the older he became. When he was small, he believed his mother's bowed head meant she was unbothered. That humility made her impervious. But as he grew, he learned to recognize the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the way her jaw trembled when she swallowed words she should have been allowed to speak. She never complained, never defended herself, never confronted the heir, because she knew exactly how dangerous his attention could be. Elias remembered a morning when he followed her up the path toward the laundry rooms, hoping to spend a few minutes together before her shift began. They were laughing quietly over something one of the stable cats had done when the heir appeared at the top of the stairs. His gaze landed on them like a blade. "What is this?" he said, voice dripping with contempt. "A family stroll. How adorable." His mother immediately stepped in front of Elias, shielding him without making it obvious. "Forgive us, Señor," she said softly. "My son was just bringing me my apron." The heir's eyes narrowed, raking over Elias with a kind of disgust that made the boy feel both exposed and dirty. "The stable boy," he murmured, "always underfoot, always watching." Elias didn't understand the accusation then. Watching what? Doing what wrong? But the look the heir gave him, sharp, assessing, made his skin prickle with unease. "And you," the heir continued, turning his attention to the mother, "should know better than to hold conversations when there is work waiting inside." She bowed her head. "Yes, Señor. Yes, Señor," the heir mocked under his breath. "Learn your place." He walked past them, brushing so close to Elias that the boy flinched. When he was gone, Elias felt the tremor in his mother's fingers as she took the apron from him. She forced a smile, but her eyes were bright with something she refused to name. "It's all right," she whispered. But he knew it wasn't. The heir's cruelty only deepened with time. He found ways to remind the mother of her position every chance he got. If she cleaned a room perfectly, he insisted she redo it. If she avoided his path, he called her disrespectful. If she stood still, he accused her of staring. There was no version of reality in which she was not at fault. Worse, the heir began targeting Elias with growing precision. He mocked his hair, pulling a curl once, then sneering when Elias winced. He made comments about his skin, his height, the shape of his lips, calling attention to every feature Elias had inherited from his mother. Sometimes his words came coated in false amusement, the way nobles laughed at dogs performing tricks. Other times, his voice dropped into a low warning that felt far too personal. "You and your mother," he whispered once, leaning in close enough that Elias felt his breath on his cheek. "Always acting like you belong here. You don't." Elias didn't answer. His mother's warnings echoed in his mind. "Walk away. Don't fight them. Your anger is worth more than they are." So he walked. He kept walking, but the heir's eyes followed him. That was the part Elias didn't understand. Why the heir looked at him with a mix of contempt and something darker, something uneasy. It wasn't just hatred, it was recognition. Elias didn't know what it meant, but his mother did. Every time the heir's gaze lingered too long, she moved between them, as if she could physically shield Elias from being seen too clearly. The manor's other servants noticed too. Some avoided looking at Elias altogether, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. Others watched with pity they pretended not to feel. No one spoke aloud what they all sensed, that something about Elias threatened the heir in a way that made cruelty feel like an act of defense. There were days when Elias returned to the stables feeling as if he had been bruised without being touched. Days when the silence around him felt heavy enough to crush. Days when he wondered what invisible rule he had broken simply by existing. One evening, after a particularly harsh confrontation in the hallway, where the heir shoved past him and muttered, "Mistake," Elias found his mother sitting alone in the laundry room, her hands trembling as she folded linens. He walked toward her. She didn't look up. "My," he whispered, "why does he hate us so much?" Her hands stilled. For a moment she closed her eyes, and he saw pain roll through her like a silent wave. When she finally met his gaze, her expression was filled with sorrow Elias didn't yet understand. "Because some truths," she said softly, "terrify people more than lies." He didn't understand then, but he would. Because the heir's cruelty was not random. It was rooted in a truth his mother carried in silence. A truth buried in the Lord's fear. A truth the entire manor pretended not to see. A truth that lived in Elias's skin, in his curls, in the shape of his eyes. And that truth was growing harder to hide. The nights in the manor had a way of holding secrets. When the sun went down and the noble lamps burned low behind velvet curtains, the stone walls seemed to loosen their tongues. Whispers traveled farther, footsteps echoed deeper, and Elias always felt as though the darkness revealed more truth than the daylight ever dared. It was late, later than he was supposed to be awake, but he couldn't sleep, not with the heir's words still circling his mind like birds of prey. He had fed the horses, swept the last bits of straw from the floor, lay down on his thin blanket in the loft. But his eyes refused to close. His thoughts refused to settle. "Why does he hate us?" he had asked his mother. She hadn't answered, because silence was safer. Elias rolled onto his side, staring through the gaps in the wooden planks toward the courtyard. A lantern flickered outside. Voices drifted faintly, muted, urgent, too sharp for this hour. He frowned. The Lord never summoned people this late unless something was wrong. Curiosity tugged at him. Or maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the unsettling feeling that he was standing on the edge of something, and if he didn't look now, he might never know. He slipped from his blanket, climbed quietly down the ladder, and padded barefoot across the stable floor. The dirt was cold against his soles. The wind carried fragments of conversation through the small gaps in the stable walls. He followed the sound into the adjoining corridor, keeping to the shadows the way a lifetime in servitude had taught him. The voices grew clearer as he approached the servants' entrance. One was sharp and familiar, the heir. The other was deeper, older, weighted by authority, the Lord. "I don't care what anyone says," the heir hissed. "She needs to be disciplined." Elias froze behind a stack of crates, breath catching in his throat. She. They were talking about his mother. "You will lower your voice," the Lord said, not as a command but as a warning. She disrespected me, the heir argued. I will not tolerate it. Your pride is wounded, the Lord replied. Not your honor. The heir scoffed. Don't pretend you care about honor, not after… He stopped abruptly, as if he had stepped too close to a cliff and realized it too late. The Lord's voice dropped into dangerous quiet. Finish your sentence carefully. Elias pressed a hand against the wall to steady himself. The heir exhaled sharply. Fine, let's discuss something else. A pause. The boy. The boy. Elias felt the world narrow to a point. The Lord did not respond. The silence stretched, thick and telling. You know exactly what I'm asking, the heir said, each word dripping with accusation. The Lord exhaled slowly. This discussion is over. No, the heir snapped. It's not. Not until you admit what everyone else already suspects. The Lord's boots scraped against the stone as he turned away, but the heir continued, his voice rising. He has her skin, her hair, her features. He looks nothing like the rest of us. Elias felt his chest tighten painfully. He curled his fingers against his knees, nails digging into his skin. Enough, the Lord warned. He shouldn't even be here, the heir shouted. And you know it. Lower your voice. He doesn't know who fathered him, the heir spit out, the sentence striking the air like a blade. But I do. The world shattered. The corridor dimmed. Elias's vision tunneled. He pressed both hands to the cold floor to stop himself from collapsing. The words echoed through him, louder than the wind, louder than his heartbeat. He doesn't know who fathered him. He doesn't know who fathered him. He doesn't know. The Lord moved so quickly Elias barely heard the approach. A heavy thud sounded, fist to wall, or perhaps hand against the heir's shoulder. You will not speak of this again, the Lord growled. And why not? The heir shouted back. Because the truth makes you look weak? Or because it makes him look like you're… A sound like a slap cracked through the corridor. Elias's breath hitched. The heir groaned softly, recoiling. You struck me. Be grateful I stopped at one. You are defending them, the heir said, voice trembling with fury. After everything. After all her lies, all her insolence, all the shame she brought. Not another word about her, the Lord said, so quietly that Elias had to strain to hear it. The heir's voice sharpened to a razor. You think I don't know? You think I don't see it? Every time you look at him, every time you look at her, you show it. Enough, the Lord said again, but this time his voice cracked. Elias's stomach twisted into knots. Him, her, truth, shame. Pieces he didn't want to fit together were beginning to slide into place. The heir's breathing was ragged. Admit it, he demanded. Admit what you've been hiding all these years. I owe you no explanation, the Lord rasped. No, the heir whispered. But you owe him one. Silence hit the corridor like a blow. Elias's heart pounded so violently he feared it would give him away. He shut his eyes tightly, willing himself invisible. Then the Lord spoke, slow and soft and drenched in exhaustion. The past is not your concern. Then why does he exist? The heir asked. Elias felt the question stab into him like a knife. Why does he exist? He didn't hear the rest, not fully. Their voices blended into a storm, drowned out by the ringing in his ears. Fear crawled up his spine. The ground felt unsteady beneath him. His skin burned with questions he never asked, but now needed answers to. A door slammed. Footsteps retreated. The heir stormed one way, the Lord another. Elias remained crouched in the shadows long after their voices faded. Once he found the strength to move, he staggered back through the stables and pressed his back against a stall door, his breath shaking uncontrollably. He didn't know his father. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know the answers to anything. But someone did. His mother. And he knew now, with painful clarity, that she had been carrying a story she feared would destroy them both. Tonight, for the first time in his life, Elias realized that the silence in their home was not protection. It was a shield against a truth sharp enough to bleed. and he had just heard the first edge of it. Elias didn't sleep that night. He didn't even try. He lay awake in the loft, staring at the beams above him as if the truth he had overheard would slip between the cracks in the wood and rearrange itself into something less painful. But the words stayed exactly as they were. Sharp, cold, undeniable. He doesn't know who fathered him. But I do. His thoughts twisted with fear and shame and something else. An ache he didn't have a name for. The kind of ache that came from realizing that your entire life had a door you never knew existed, and someone else held the key to it. When morning came, he felt hollow. He fed the horses without tasting breakfast. He cleaned stalls without noticing what his hands were doing. Every sound from the manor made him flinch. His mother found him in the corner stall, sitting on an overturned bucket staring at nothing. "Elias," she said gently, "you didn't come home last night." He didn't answer. She approached slowly, noticing the stiffness in his posture, the distant look in his eyes. Something had changed in him, something she had prayed would never happen. "What's wrong?" she whispered. He raised his head, and the emptiness in his expression stole her breath. "I heard them," he said. Her face paled. "Who?" "The heir. The Lord." Her hands trembled. "Elias, where were you?" "In the corridor, behind the crates." His voice shook despite his efforts to keep it steady. "They were talking about you. About me." Her eyelids fluttered shut, as if the world had pressed too heavily against her. "What did you hear?" "Enough," he said. "More than enough." A long silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. She lowered herself to sit beside him on the bucket, but the space between them felt like a canyon. He stared at her, his curls falling forward, shadowing his eyes. Who is my father?" Her breath hitched. "I need to know," he said. "I need the truth. You can't protect me from it anymore." She looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Her strength didn't shatter. It bent under the weight of years, bent under the memory of every insult she had endured, bent under the truth she had buried so deeply she hoped even the earth would forget it. "Elias," she began, voice soft, "there are things you don't understand." "Then explain them to me," he whispered. Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hold back. She wasn't a woman who cried easily. Pain had taught her how to swallow tears before they reached the surface. But now, standing before her son, she felt them burning through the shield she had built. She reached for his hand. He let her hold it, but his fingers were stiff, uncertain. "When I came to this manor," she said slowly, "I was 17. Younger than you are now." He blinked, surprised. He had always imagined her arriving strong, grown, unshakable. But she continued, "I had nowhere else to go. My family was gone. I needed work, and this was the only place that offered it. They didn't want me, not really. They only wanted hands that could work harder and longer than theirs." Her voice tightened. "No one looked at me with kindness. Not the servants, not the guards, not the nobles. They saw my skin, my hair, and decided who I was before I even spoke." Elias felt anger burn in his stomach. "I survived by staying silent," she whispered, "by keeping my head down, by doing twice the work for half the respect, day after day." Her gaze went distant, haunted by memories buried deep. And then, he noticed me. Elias's breath caught. She didn't have to say who. "The Lord," she said anyway, because lies were no longer an option. "He was younger then, kinder than he is now." He spoke softly. "He thanked me when I worked late. He treated me like I was a person." Elias swallowed hard. The truth was unfolding exactly where he feared it would lead. "We grew close," she said. Pain threaded through each syllable. "Too close. And that closeness was a mistake. One that cost me everything. Her hands trembled around his. When I became pregnant, the manor turned against me completely. They called me things I cannot repeat. They said I was trying to trap him. They said I tempted him. They said I deserved whatever happened next. Elias felt something in his chest clench so tightly he could barely breathe. "What did he do?" he asked. Her lips pressed together. "He panicked. He told me the truth. That if anyone found out, it would ruin him. Ruin the house. Ruin everything." "So he left you?" Elias said, bitterness seeping into his voice. "No," she whispered. "Worse. He protected me in secret. But in public he said nothing. Not a word. He let them shame me. He let them blame me. He let them look at you the way they do." Elias looked away, jaw tightening until it hurt. "He visited once, just once after you were born. He held you." Her voice broke, and then he walked away, because he was afraid. The words hit Elias like a blow. His throat tightened. His eyes stung. His heartbeat felt wrong, too fast, too fragile. "So it's true," he whispered. "He's my father." Her silence answered for her. Elias stood abruptly, pulling his hand from hers. He paced the stall, fingers digging into his hair, breath coming in uneven bursts. She watched helplessly. "Elias, why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, turning to her. "Why did you hide it? Why did you let me grow up thinking I was nobody's son?" "You were never nobody," she said, tears finally falling. "You were mine." "That wasn't enough for them," he said. "It was supposed to be enough for you." He shook his head. "You said silence protected us, but silence is why he hates us. Silence is why they all whisper. Silence is why the heir looks at me like I stole something from him." His mother's face crumpled. "He looks at you," she whispered. "Because every time he does, he sees the truth his father is too cowardly to acknowledge." Elias froze. A wave of understanding washed over him, cold, violent, enormous. The heir wasn't cruel because of Elias's skin. He wasn't cruel because of Elias's curls. He wasn't cruel because of class. He was cruel because Elias existed, because Elias was proof. Proof of betrayal, proof of shame, proof that his mother had been chosen over noble women, proof that the Lord had loved someone he shouldn't. Elias sank onto the bucket again, trembling. His mother knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms despite his resistance. "My son," she whispered against his hair. "I wanted to spare you. I wanted you to have a childhood untouched by this poison. I wanted you to grow strong before the world tried to break you." Her tears slipped onto his cheek. "I never wanted you to carry the weight of another man's sins." He closed his eyes tightly. What do I do now?" She held him tighter. "We survive," she whispered, "the way we always have." But Elias felt the truth carving itself into his bones. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was waking up. And the world that kept him silent was about to discover what a boy does when the truth finally finds him. The manor had its own rhythm, a cold, rigid cadence that everyone learned to obey. Breakfast was the hour of scrutiny, the moment when nobles gathered like perfumed vultures, when servants moved like shadows, when the heir liked to parade his power. Elias hated mornings near the Great Hall. He avoided them whenever he could. But this morning, fate didn't care what he wanted. Word spread quickly. The heir was in a foul mood, worse than usual, the kind of mood that made even guards shrink. Servants whispered in corners. Maids kept their eyes down. Elias noticed something else too. His mother was tense. She held her tray differently. Her steps were smaller. Her silence was sharper, as if bracing for a blow she couldn't predict. He followed her at a distance, pretending he was only delivering fresh water buckets to the upper courtyard. But the truth was simpler. He didn't trust the heir. Not after what Elias had overheard the night before. Not with the truth crashing through him like a storm he couldn't outrun. He paused at the foot of the wide staircase that led to the hall. From there, he had a clear view of the room beyond the doors. sunlight spilling across marble floors, nobles murmuring behind golden cups, the heir lounging in his grand chair with an expression that promised cruelty. Elias watched from the shadows as his mother entered carrying a heavy silver tray. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had been forced to make herself invisible. But today, invisibility was not what the heir wanted. He wanted a target. Late, the heir drawled loudly, though she was not late. As usual. His mother bowed her head. "Forgive me, senor." "No," he said. "I don't think I will." A murmur of uneasy amusement rippled among the nobles. Elias felt heat rise in his chest. His mother stepped forward to pour tea into the Lord's cup, but as she leaned slightly, the heir extended a foot just enough for her hip to catch it. She stumbled, not falling, but jolting forward in a way that made the tray tilt dangerously. Gasps sounded through the hall. A single cup slid off the edge, hit the floor, and cracked. That was all it took. The heir shot to his feet. "Incompetent woman!" His mother went still, eyes wide, hands trembling as she set the tray down with the utmost care. I'm sorry, senor," she whispered. "Are you?" he hissed, stepping closer. "Or is clumsiness simply in your nature?" Elias felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The heir wasn't finished. "You embarrass this house every time you breathe," he said. Then, raising his voice, "Look at her. Look at what we are forced to tolerate." The nobles stared, some with pity, some with disdain, all complicit. Elias took a step forward, but stopped when a guard brushed past. If he interfered now, he'd be dragged out by force. He clenched his fists so tightly his nails dug into his palms. His mother knelt to gather the broken pieces. She handled them delicately, as if afraid one more crack would shatter her entirely. Her curls fell forward, shielding her face, but Elias knew she was fighting tears. And the heir, seeing that, smiled. "You should be grateful," he said, circling her like a predator. "Others in your position would have been dismissed long ago, or worse." She pressed her lips together. Elias recognized that look, the one she wore when humiliation was too heavy to swallow. Then the heir leaned in, voice low but loud enough for the hall to hear. "Tell me, do you ever think about your son? About how he runs around this estate like he belongs here? About how everyone sees that face and wonders who he's really the child of?" Her breath hitched. A crack ran through Elias's chest. The heir continued, savoring every word. "Do you think we don't notice how he looks nothing like you? Nothing like anyone from this house? Do you think we don't see the truth stamped on his skin?" His mother froze completely, like a deer cornered. "And you expect us to believe," the heir said loudly, triumphantly, "that he isn't the result of your improper behavior?" A gasp rippled through the hall. Elias stopped breathing. His mother's hands clenched around the broken cup so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "He should be grateful we let him stay on the property at all," the heir continued, "instead of sending him and his whore of a mother back to the gutter where they—" The words didn't finish, because Elias didn't remember running. He didn't remember deciding. He didn't remember breathing. One moment he was at the doorway. The next, he was in the center of the hall, shoving past a startled guard. And then he was between the heir and his mother. Every noble rose. Servants gasped. The Lord stood, eyes wide, but Elias didn't care. His body trembled with fury as he faced the heir directly for the first time in his life. "You don't talk about her like that," he said, voice shaking. "Not ever." The heir stared at him in stunned silence. Then his mouth curled into a cruel smile. "Ah," he said softly, "the mistake speaks." He struck, a backhand meant to humiliate. Elias stumbled, pain exploding across his cheek, but he didn't fall. He looked at the heir again, this time with eyes that held no fear. "No," Elias said, breath ragged. "I'm done being silent." "The stable boy grows a spine," the heir mocked. "How charming." Elias stepped closer. "Touch her again," he said, "and you'll regret it." A stunned hush fell over the hall. The heir's expression twisted into something vicious. "You think you can stand against me?" "I can stand for her," Elias replied. His mother reached for him desperately. "Elias, please." But the heir lunged. Elias braced himself. And in that moment, the childhood he had clung to, shy, obedient, unseen, burned away. What rose in its place was something fierce, something rightful, something born from years of humiliation and one unbearable truth: he would bleed before he let anyone hurt his mother again. The hall watched, breathless, as the heir swung. But Elias didn't step back. For the first time in his life, he stepped forward. The heir lunged with the fury of a man who had been publicly challenged by someone he believed beneath the dirt under his boots. His fist connected with Elias's jaw, snapping his head to the side. Gasps tore through the hall. Servants flinched. Nobles leaned forward as if watching a spectacle rather than an assault. Elias tasted blood, but he didn't fall. He straightened slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. The metallic tang only sharpened the fire inside him. The heir blinked, startled that one blow hadn't been enough to flatten him. It wasn't just strength that held Elias upright. It was something deeper, something older, something inherited. "Still standing," the heir sneered. "How disappointing." He swung again. Elias dodged this time. Instinct guided him. Years of hauling crates, lifting bales of hay, wrestling stubborn horses had given him a body stronger than the heir ever realized. Elias grabbed the heir's forearm, pushing it aside, but he didn't strike back. He didn't know how to fight like nobles did. He only knew how to endure, and endure he did. The heir growled, shoved him into a pillar, and drove a knee into his ribs. Pain exploded through Elias's side. He gasped, collapsing to his knees. His mother cried out, but two guards held her back. "Let him be taught," one of them muttered. The heir circled Elias with slow, mocking steps. "You should have stayed in the stables," he said. "Know your place." Elias raised his head, breathing through the agony, and met the heir's eyes. "My place," he whispered, "is not at your feet." The heir struck him across the face again. Elias's vision blurred. He grabbed the edge of the pillar, pulled himself up, and stood swaying. The room buzzed, but he focused on one thing: his mother's terrified expression. Her lips trembled. Tears glistened but didn't fall. She had seen enough cruelty in her life to hold them back. He couldn't let her watch him break. The heir lunged once more, but Elias braced and shoved, using the momentum of the noble's own weight. The heir stumbled back, crashing into a chair. Gasps rose again, this time tinged with shock. A servant whispered, "He pushed him." Another muttered, "He's fighting the heir head-on." The heir scrambled to his feet, face red with fury and humiliation. "How dare you!" he spat. "You filthy—" "Enough!" The Lord's voice cracked through the hall like thunder. Everyone froze, even the heir. The Lord stepped forward, his expression carved in stone, but Elias noticed something else beneath the surface. Panic. A deep, bone-deep panic that made his usually firm voice tremble. "Stop this," the Lord commanded, but the heir was past reason. "He deserves punishment," the heir shouted. "He thinks he can challenge me? Me? I will not be mocked by a bastard." The Lord's hand shot out and gripped the heir's arm so tightly the heir winced. Not another word. But the heir tore free. Why? Because the truth might finally come out? Elias felt the room shift. The nobles stiffened. Servants halted mid-breath. His mother trembled. "The truth everyone sees," the heir continued, pointing at Elias with shaking fury. "Even if you're too much of a coward to say it." "Silence," the Lord hissed. But the heir's rage was past containment. He wanted the wound open, wanted it bleeding for the world to see. "He has your eyes," the heir shouted. The hall erupted into murmurs. Elias froze, his stomach twisted violently. He looked at the Lord, truly looked, and for the first time he didn't see a distant noble. He saw the same shade of warm brown in the irises, the same faint gold around the pupils. He had always thought his eyes were strange, uncommon, but now he saw them reflected perfectly in the man standing before him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the nobles who pretended indifference shifted uneasily. The heir saw their faces and stepped closer, voice rising with bitter triumph. "You think you hide it well? Look at him. Look at his skin, his hair, his eyes. He is you." Elias's mother broke then. She covered her mouth as if holding back a sob that had been trapped for years. The Lord closed his eyes, and something inside him crumbled in plain view. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched. Every attempt to maintain dignity collapsed under a truth too heavy to bear. "She seduced you," the heir continued viciously, "and now her son stands here pretending he deserves respect. A servant's brat. An accident." Elias didn't hear the rest. Anger flooded him, pure, hot, volcanic. It roared through his bloodstream, burned through his fear, and left only one truth. He would not let anyone call his mother a trap, a mistake, a stain. "Don't you speak about her," Elias rasped. The heir smirked. "Or what? What will you do, stable boy?" Elias stepped forward. The guards reacted, moving as if to intervene, but the Lord raised a trembling hand. "No," he said. "Let him speak." The hall fell silent. Elias's voice was rough, cracked, but steady. "You hate me because I exist," he said. "Because every time you see me, you see the truth. I am not ashamed of that. You are." Everyone stared. The heir's face twisted into something grotesque. "You dare." Elias didn't back down. "You're terrified of me," he said softly, "and you don't even know me. You don't know how hard I work, how much I love her, how much I survive every day while you throw tantrums from thrones you never earned." A gasp echoed, not from a servant, but from one of the nobles. The heir snapped. He lunged again, fist raised, eyes wild. But Elias caught his wrist. For the first time, he held it firmly. The heir froze. There in the center of the hall, everyone saw what the heir refused to admit. The boy wasn't bending. The boy wasn't breaking. The boy wasn't beneath him. He was his equal, in strength, in spirit, in blood. The heir tried to yank his arm away, but Elias held him fast. "Let go," the heir snarled. Elias released him, but not out of fear, out of mercy. The heir stumbled back, humiliated again. The Lord stepped forward at last, his voice heavy with a lifetime of regret. "This ends now," he said. But none of them knew the truth. Nothing was ending. Everything was beginning. Because today the house had seen something it could never unsee. A boy rising to defend the mother he loved, and revealing in the same breath exactly whose son he was. The hall felt suspended in time. No one moved. No one breathed. The air was thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Heavy, electric, waiting to break over every person present. Elias stood in the center, chest heaving, knuckles scraped, bruises blossoming across his jaw. The heir stumbled backward, shaken in a way that went far beyond physical pain, and the Lord, pale, trembling, eyes wide with the weight of a secret that no longer belonged to him, looked as though the world he had built was collapsing grain by grain. Then Elias heard it, a soft sound, a breath, breaking. He turned. His mother stood at the edge of the hall, her apron wrinkled from trembling hands, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. She looked small against the massive marble columns and golden chandeliers, but something about her presence eclipsed everything else. Her voice, when it finally came, was not loud. It didn't need to be. Enough. The word fell into the hall like a stone in still water. Quiet, but the ripples were undeniable. "Enough," she repeated, stepping forward. "This cruelty, this silence, this shame that you all pretend is mine alone to carry." Every noble watched her with the discomfort of people unused to being confronted by the truth. Every servant stood frozen, unable to look away. She walked past Elias and laid a trembling hand on his shoulder. Her touch steadied him. Then she lifted her chin, looked directly at the heir, and said, "You have no right to speak of him, no right to speak of me." The heir scoffed, but there was a tremor beneath his defiance. "I have every right. This house is built on lies," she said sharply. "On secrets. on the belief that those born into privilege can rewrite the truth as they please. Gasps scattered across the hall. Nobles glanced anxiously at the Lord, waiting for him to silence her. But he didn't. He couldn't. He stood frozen, guilt etched deep into the lines of his face. She turned to him now, and for the first time since Elias had known him, the Lord lowered his gaze. "You should have spoken," she said softly. "Years ago, when I stood alone in these halls, carrying a child and drowning in the looks and whispers your silence allowed." The Lord closed his eyes. "You let them tear me apart," she continued. "Day after day, you let them call me a liar, a temptress, a stain. You let your son, your heir, abuse his power, all while you hid behind fear." The heir's mouth fell open. "He told you nothing. Nothing. You weren't worthy of—" She silenced him with a single look. Not anger, not hatred. Something worse, something truer. Pity. "You hate him," she said, her voice trembling slightly as her eyes moved to the heir. "Because he is what you are not." The heir stiffened. "And what is that supposed to mean?" "A good man." A murmur rippled through the hall like wind through dry leaves. Elias felt heat rise to his face, but not from embarrassment, from pride. From a lifetime of watching her carry burdens she never deserved, and now watching her release them one by one. She stepped forward, directly in front of the nobles who had judged her for years. "You all saw what you wanted," she said. "You saw a black servant and assumed the worst. You saw her son and whispered questions. You saw me working in silence and called it humility, when it was survival." A noble woman flinched visibly. Her mother's voice hardened. "You looked at my son and saw shame when you should have seen innocence. You saw a child who did nothing wrong, who only wanted to live, to learn, to love." One of the elder servants bowed his head in quiet agreement. The heir snarled, "He deserves nothing from us." Her expression shifted, softening only when she turned toward Elias. She lifted his face gently between her palms, wiping a smear of blood with her thumb. "My son deserves everything," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "Not because of who his father is, but because of who he is." Elias swallowed hard, fighting the tightness in his throat. She turned once more to the Lord, who still stood frozen behind the long table, guilt rooting him in place. "It is time," she whispered. "No more hiding. No more silence." He opened his mouth, but the words caught. Elias murmured, his voice breaking. She squeezed his hand. "Truth is not a weapon," she said softly, "but lies always become one." A hush fell across the hall. Everyone waited. Everyone knew what came next. Finally, the Lord stepped forward. His steps were unsteady, his face ashen. He stopped beside Elias and his mother, looking at them as if seeing them for the first time. Then, with a voice rough with shame, he said, "She is right." The hall erupted into shocked whispers. The Lord raised a hand for silence. "It is time I speak what I should have spoken years ago." The heir stared at him in horror. "Father, don't— This," the Lord said louder now, "is my son." The words reverberated through the hall. Servants gasped. Nobles recoiled. One of the guards bowed his head. Elias stood frozen, every inch of him trembling. "And she," the Lord continued, voice cracking, "is the woman I failed, the woman I wronged, the woman I should have protected." The heir's face twisted. "You're throwing everything away for them?" The Lord turned to him. "No, I am reclaiming what I threw away." Divisions split through the room like lightning. Some nobles turned their backs in disgust. Others whispered feverishly, glancing between Elias and the Lord. Servants exchanged wide-eyed looks. The guards, unsure of protocol, stood rigid and silent. But Elias saw only his mother. Her tears, quiet, steady, were not tears of shame. They were tears of release. For the first time in 16 years, she was not hiding. For the first time in his life, neither was he. And the house, so accustomed to silence, now stood in the wreckage of a truth that would change everything. The hall did not return to silence. It couldn't. The truth had cracked something deep in its foundations, and everyone felt it. The nobles shifting in their seats, the guards uncertain, the servants trying and failing to hide the shock in their eyes. A storm had rolled into the manor, not with thunder, but with confession. And now no one knew what the world would look like when it passed. Elias stood at the center of it all, bruised, breathless, staring at the man who had just called him son. The word landed heavily, as if it had been waiting years for its chance to finally exist. It wrapped around him, not gently, not softly, but undeniably. And he didn't know whether to accept it or reject it. He only knew one truth with certainty. His mother's hand was still in his, and that was the only anchor he trusted. The heir was the first to break the stunned quiet. He stepped forward, trembling with a mixture of fury and betrayal that twisted his features into something unrecognizable. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You can't stand here in front of all these people and—" "I already have," the Lord said. "It isn't true," the heir shouted. "Tell them it isn't. Tell him he's nothing." Elias felt the echo of those words sink into him like old scars reopening. For a second he waited, almost desperately, to hear what the Lord would say next, to see whether he would back away again, hide behind duty or pride or cowardice. But the Lord's voice, when it came, held no hesitation. "He is not nothing," he said. "He never was." The heir stumbled back, as if struck. The nobles murmured, startled by the finality in the Lord's tone. The house had been built on years of assumed truths, hierarchies carved into stone, power handed down through names, heritage, bloodlines. And now those same truths were collapsing in real time. The mother squeezed Elias's hand gently. He looked at her, expecting grief or fear or regret. Instead, he found a steady strength, a quiet dignity that seemed to glow through every tear on her cheeks. This was not the face of a broken woman. It was the face of a survivor who finally saw justice approach after a lifetime of being denied. The Lord stepped closer, his gaze fixed on her. "I wronged you," he said, voice trembling. "I wronged both of you. There is nothing I can say to erase it." "Then don't try," she replied softly. "Truth is enough." He nodded, slowly, painfully. "If you will allow it," he said, turning to Elias, "I will acknowledge you formally, give you my name, my protection, my inheritance, everything I should have given long ago." Elias felt his heart stop, then lurch. The offer hung in the air like a golden chain, beautiful, heavy, binding. His mother's fingers tightened on his, not to push him forward, not to pull him back, but to remind him he had a choice. Something inside him shifted. All his life, he had been treated like he didn't belong, like he was an outsider, a mistake, a shadow wandering halls that were never meant to hold him. And now the man who had helped create that shadow was offering to place him in the light. But the light came with chains of its own. Elias lifted his chin, looking directly into the Lord's eyes. "You want to give me your name," he said quietly. "Yes," the Lord whispered. "It is your right." Elias looked around the hall, at the nobles staring as if they had just witnessed a scandal that would ripple through every household in the region, at the servants whose faces held glimmers of hope, at the heir, broken, furious, undone, and finally, at his mother. Her, always her, the one who held him through every night of doubt, the one who shielded him from cruelty, the one who suffered so he could live, the one who had nothing, and yet gave him everything. He turned back to the Lord. "I don't need your name," he said softly. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Even the Lord's eyes widened. Elias continued, voice steady. "A name doesn't make me who I am. She did." He gestured to his mother. "She raised me. She protected me. She carried all the consequences alone. If I carry anyone's name, it will be hers." Tears welled in his mother's eyes, falling silently. The Lord swallowed hard. "I understand," he whispered. "All I ask is a chance to make amends." Elias hesitated. Then he nodded once. Do it by changing this house, not for me, for her, for every servant who has ever lived afraid. The Lord bowed his head, not out of ritual, but out of respect. I will. The heir stepped forward, voice raw. And what about me? Am I supposed to stand aside while he... You, the Lord interrupted, turning to him, will answer for your cruelty. The heir's jaw dropped. Father, the Lord's voice firmed. A title does not excuse a corrupted heart. If you wish to lead this house one day, you will do so with humility, not hatred, and you will begin by apologizing. The heir trembled. His eyes darted to Elias, filled with wounded pride and something like fear. He opened his mouth, perhaps to refuse, but the weight of the room crushed the rebellion inside him. He bowed his head, not to Elias, but to the truth. The house watched, breathless. His mother stepped forward, touching Elias's face, inspecting his bruises with trembling tenderness. My son, she whispered, you stood for me today. Elias leaned into her touch. You always stood for me, he murmured. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she wasn't holding him to protect him. She was holding him because she could. I'm proud of you, she whispered. He closed his eyes, feeling the truth settle into him. Warm, healing, solid. The Lord approached cautiously. If you will let me, he said, I would like to help secure a future for you both, whether you take my name or not. Elias looked at his mother. She nodded gently. Let him try, she said. Trying is more than he did before. And that was enough. Elias stepped away from the hall, from the stairs, from the weight of generations. He walked toward the doorway, his mother at his side. The Lord watched them go, shoulders shaking with silent regret. The heir sank into a chair, fury drained into exhaustion. The nobles whispered, already rewriting the story in their minds. But Elias didn't care. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. He was not a mistake. He was not a shadow. He was not a stain on someone else's legacy. He was his mother's son. And that was a destiny powerful enough to build a new life. One forged not by bloodlines, but by truth, courage, and love.